Long story short, I got diagnosed New Year's Eve 2020. I had a colonoscopy, a brain MRI, a abdominal MRI, a biopsy. I flew to Texas for a second opinion at MD Anderson. Ultimately ended up moving there a week later. Went through the crazy Texas freeze, started treatment, switched oncologist, had the treatment plan change, and then met Driven to Cure, which completely changed everything. So one of the next videos I'm going to record is going to talk about the best questions to ask when you go for your first appointment after you've been diagnosed with cancer. But before I got to those videos, I thought I would finish up the story about how I got diagnosed and my road to surgery, because it was a long one. So oftentimes when people are diagnosed with kidney cancer, they'll just go straight into surgery. If you're diagnosed at stage 4, oftentimes that depends on kind of where you're at and where it has spread. If you will go to surgery or if you will go straight onto systemic treatment. So I talk about what led up to me being diagnosed in my previous video. You can check it out here. And so I talk about the process. I was feeling kind of off for about a year and a half, and they kind of just thought I had anxiety, which was causing my high blood pressure and my tachycardia. Eventually, I ended up being diagnosed with stage 4 kidney cancer in the ER. So I'll start kind of from there, and I'll talk about how I got to surgery and everything that happened up until I had surgery. I had surgery on June 29th, so it was about 6 months later. So I'll talk about kind of what happened during that period until I made it to surgery. It was a long road. All right, so in the ER that day, they found my tumors. So I had a 12 centimeter tumor on my right kidney, and at the time, we thought there was about 6 liver lesions because they were seeing the larger lesions that were in my liver. Some of the biggest ones were about this size, and then some of the small ones went all the way down to 1 centimeter, which is like about the size of a pea. Eventually, when my tumor came out, this is what it looks like, so it just kind of gives you a general idea of how big it was. What I have is called a oncocytoma, and I have a metastatic oncocytoma, which meant it spread from my kidney to my liver, in my case, which is extremely, extremely rare. I then went to meet with my oncologist, and I met with my oncologist on January 6th. This was the first appointment. I knew that I was likely stage 4, but I didn't know anything else other than what I had found on Google. You don't want to Google your diagnosis. I thought I'd go into that appointment to get my questions answered and I would start treatment immediately. First appointment, especially if you're diagnosed in the ER, is really just about establishing care. And so that's what we did. My oncologist also got started on ordering a whole bunch of tests. He was amazing. He ordered absolutely everything up front that he should have. So we had done genetic, genomic, and somatic testing. We basically were testing everything we could to try to figure out why this happened because I was so young. We thought I likely must have had a genetic mutation or something like that was causing the cancer. So he ordered all that. He also ordered an MRI of my brain and an MRI of my abdomen. Met with him, got everything scheduled. It took weeks to get an MRI. One, it was the beginning of the new year, and then I remember how distracted everybody was, and I did not understand why. I felt like I couldn't really get anybody to pay attention or care to the fact that my scans were being pushed out by 3 weeks. When my oncologist sounded like he wanted me to get in for those ASAP, and everybody just seemed very distracted. I remember once I got home and realized everything that was going on at the Capitol, I felt so selfish. Like I was all caught up in my world over here trying to get my scan scheduled and all caught up in just like thinking like, oh, I'm gonna die. And there was much bigger problems going on in the world. What an interesting day to have your very first appointment. From there, I went in, had the colonoscopy. Everything looked normal from the colonoscopy. I also had an appointment with the surgeon who was going to remove the tumor if the spots on my liver came back benign. But he did clarify for me that that was only possible if the MRI told us that the tumors in my liver did not look like metastatic disease. My tumor looked like an oncocytoma. And oncocytomas on a scan often have what's called a central scar. Pretty unique to oncocytomas, although some other types do occasionally have it, and oncocytomas only have it about 30% of the time. It looks like a giant asteroid hit it. I know that's like not a medical way to describe anything, but that's what it looks like to me. It looks like a giant asteroid hit it. That's what they saw in my scans and why they thought it was an oncocytoma. So I remember after I left my first appointment and I found out, okay, this could be an oncocytoma, I met with the surgical team to see if it was possible. If it was an oncocytoma, we were just going to remove the tumor and then I wouldn't need any follow-ups because oncocytomas are benign. But I was told if it had spread to my liver, it was already stage 4 and that surgery wouldn't be possible at that point. There'd be no reason to do surgery because we couldn't do surgery in my liver because the tumors were too large and there was too many of them. I would just start on systemic treatment. We had to wait to find out if surgery was going to happen based on the MRI and my biopsy results. Then I went for my MRI. We got the MRI results, and I remember waiting for that MRI, pace back and forth, and just think, okay, please be an oncocytoma, please be an oncocytoma, please be an oncocytoma. I was so ridiculously stressed. I just wanted this thing to be an oncocytoma so I could just have surgery and be done with it. Anyways, so we got the MRI results back, and they thought that the lesions did look suspicious in my liver, and so I was going to go for a biopsy. I already had the biopsy scheduled, but now we were going to do a biopsy of my liver at the same time. You can check out my biopsy video where I talk about what that process was like. I did have a small internal bleed that earned me an overnight stay. So when I got the results back, the oncologist called me in the evening to let me know the results, that it did turn out to look like it was stage 4 kidney cancer that had gone to my liver, and that those liver lesions were metastatic disease. So in that time, I read my pathology report, which called my tumor an unclassified oncocytic neoplasm. The pathologist was very thorough in the comments, which I am extremely thankful for. I looked up everything in the comments, and I was trying to learn as much as I could about kidney cancer and histologies, different subtypes, at the same time so I could understand what my diagnosis was. And at the time, I was looking up all the different types of kidney cancer and trying to find out kind of the different ways that they describe them in pathology reports and what they look like. So as I was reading the comments, I noticed how closely this resembled an oncocytoma and the way that an oncocytoma's histology was described. And an oncocytoma was also listed in my differential. It mentioned tumor looked a lot like an oncocytoma, but metastatic oncocytomas were exceedingly rare, so we needed to get back additional testing on it. So when I met with my oncologist, we talked about next treatment options. So he wanted to get me started as soon as possible on treatment. We were going to start, I think it was Axi-Pembro. Don't quote me on that, but I feel like that was the one we were going to start. We were going to do a TKI immunotherapy combo, which is like a chemo pill, they sometimes call it. It's targeted therapy and then immunotherapy. So I talked to him, and he told me that what I had was pretty rare. It looked like it had probably been there a long time. I'm guessing part of that came from the fact that it looked like an oncocytoma. My case had been to tumor board, which is basically where everybody gets around and talks about the case and in treatment as a group to try to figure out what the best plan is. And they had decided that they thought it was best that I started on this treatment. This all happened at the end of January, and so I was almost a month out. And in the meantime, my husband and I had been looking into different institutions because we already, from my radiology report, knew that this could have been an oncocytoma or a chromophobe possibly, which were two relatively rare tumors on the kidney. So we started looking into second opinions anyways. So we looked at different places that we might be able to get a second opinion on. I could feel this thing in my stomach, and it was still my ultimate goal to get this thing out. I asked every doctor that I met from that point forward if we could get surgery done. They all gave me that exact same answer, that I had too many in my liver, that they were too big, we couldn't operate. But that was always my ultimate goal because I could feel it just mentally. I wanted it out of my body, and I was not going to give up till I got there. So once we knew it was cancer, we started to look at where we would go for second opinions. At the same time, we were also trying to look for a new place to live. Our lease was up on our townhome, and we were building a house for our future family when I was diagnosed. And that house was quite large, and it was going to be way too big for us both. We were looking for housing at the same time as we were looking for places to get a second opinion. And my husband was looking at MD Anderson, and that's in Houston, Texas. I had actually lived in Texas and moved back to Utah after my grandmother passed to be around family. I met my husband there, and then we had to stay there for his job at the time. And so I had given up on the idea that I'd ever be able to move back to Texas, even though that's where I wanted to live. My husband and I joke all the time that I could have found a less dramatic way back to Texas. But I remember him sitting at the computer as I was like frustrated that we couldn't find any decent housing. And I remember him asking if I wanted to go to MD Anderson because he wanted me to see the best of the best. So some of the best cancer centers for kidney cancer are Sloan Kettering in New York and MD Anderson in Houston. And he knew that I love Texas and Houston, and so he asked me if I wanted to start looking into MD Anderson. So we went through that process, called up MD Anderson, and got set up with an oncologist there, started transferring my records, and started looking at housing in Texas. At first, that meant we were going to fly out to MD Anderson to get a second opinion. And during this whole time, I constantly questioned if this was the right decision to make because it was stressful, and I felt like, are they going to tell me the exact same thing? And then I've just delayed treatment trying to get these second opinions, and is it even going to be worth it? And I was very stressed out at that moment. I wasn't sure if I was making the right decisions. My husband and I are very similar on a lot of things, but this is one thing we talked about we are quite different on. He's mentioned that if he had gotten the same diagnosis that I had, he likely wouldn't have gone for any second opinions. He probably just would have gone with the first oncologist and then started treatment immediately. Whereas I was kind of always trying to look for second opinions because it just didn't seem right. My diagnosis wasn't sitting with me right, and I just felt like I wanted to see a specialist. But this was so stressful, not just on me, but on him as well. And so I constantly thinking about everything and wondering if I had made the wrong decision in deciding to get a second opinion because of how stressful that process was, and was I just delaying care? So we flew down to MD Anderson knowing that by the end of the week, if the appointment at MD Anderson went well, we were going to be moving to Texas. And so we had an Airbnb set up that we were going to move to if the appointment went well. Before we flew down to MD Anderson, I was part of some of these kidney cancer support groups, and I had somebody in the stage 4 group, Marvin and Debbie. I love them. Marvin reached out to me and mentioned something about if I ever wanted any information about MD Anderson, he'd be happy to chat. My husband and I had a call. We had Marvin and Debbie on speakerphone before I went down for MD Anderson when I was still second guessing on if I was making the right decision. And they were absolutely incredible. I remember talking to them and Marvin giving us the rundown on what MD Anderson is like and just a glowing review of MD Anderson. And it just felt like that was the right move and I was going to be in the right place. So we decided that we were going to move to Houston. We got home and immediately packed everything that we had. We had already packed some stuff before we left because we thought that this was the route we probably were going to take. But we packed up everything. Here's some pictures and photos of that time period of us packing everything up. And it was a quick move. But we packed up everything and then we put it in a shipping container. My husband and I had a few belongings with us and a suitcase each. We couldn't fit much in the car because we also took our dog and our cat down with us. And that is an experience, but we drove down to Texas and then we got to our first Airbnb there where we were going to be staying. Also was an experience. Airbnb wasn't in the best area. We didn't know a whole lot about Houston at the time, and so we didn't know which areas were nice and which ones weren't, but we got an apartment at an Airbnb there that wasn't too far from the medical center. And I took Baxter out for a walk one day. I was bringing him back in. There was somebody on the corner. There was like shops on the bottom of this apartment complex. And I was like walking and I saw somebody on the corner there and they're in the middle of the sidewalk. This is COVID, so I'm like actively avoiding people. And so I looked down there and noticed that there was somebody on the sidewalk. So like I went the long way, tried to go out into the parking lot. And as I was walking by this person, they screamed after me and they started cursing at me and then started to come at me. And then I got scared and I like swooped Baxter up as quickly as I could. And then like I ran and I looked behind me and this guy was literally chasing me and I was petrified. This was in the middle of a parking lot. And so like I was zigzagging in between cars and I was terrified. And then I looked back at one point and he wasn't there anymore. But I got so scared. I like went the long way around, went around some bushes. And then I couldn't tell where he was anymore, so I was really scared and went back up. Anyways, we decided that probably wasn't going to be the safest place for me to take Baxter out. And so we actually ended up getting a whole nother Airbnb after that. This is my first week in Texas, still going through the diagnostic process. So dang stressful. We got into the new Airbnb and we were there, I think, for a day or two. And then the Texas freeze happened. So the big historical freeze that shut everything down. My husband, because we came from Utah, he didn't want to bring a coat because it doesn't get cold in Texas when you're from Utah. I tried to warn him that it does actually get cold in Texas. He wasn't buying it, so he didn't have a coat, which was great, as during the freeze, we were without water for, I believe, 6 days, and we were without power for 3 or 4. I had to go to HEB every day, and he had to wait 2 hours outside in the freezing cold so that we could get 2 gallons of water every single day. It was a nightmare. I remember being so cold, we piled up on the beds, and it got to, I believe, 40 degrees in the house. We piled on the beds, had all of the animals with us. We were as bundled up as we could. And I remember laying in bed there and just thinking, like, I have made the biggest mistake of my life. Like, I shouldn't have moved out of Utah. What are we doing here? I just want to go home. And I was so stressed. It was miserable. First week of trying to go through diagnostic process, get new scans, and start treatment. First week of Texas, things were not going well. But that did end up getting rescheduled. I did end up having my scans again. When I rescanned, everything looked stable. It didn't look like anything had grown at all. After the freeze, we got my scan results, and then we decided I was going to start on Cabo. So Cabo, when you start treatment, they send you a trial. I think it was like a 2 or 3 week trial of the pills while they work to try to get approval through your insurance. So I started on that while they worked on getting approval through my insurance. That was super stressful. My insurance denied it at first, and they had to repeal it. But my oncologist put me on Cabo. I think that was an excellent move on her part, which is a targeted treatment. Sometimes they call it a chemo pill. It's a oral pill that I took daily. But I had asked her the same questions at every appointment that I went to because of how bad I wanted this thing out of my body. And I asked her if I would ever qualify for surgery. And after they had taken my case to the tumor board, they talked about the fact that I might be able to qualify for surgery, but we would have to shrink all the tumors first. And I thought that that was still in the realm of possibilities. But knowing how big my tumors were now, I understand why she said what she said to me, because she ended up telling me that have surgery if we got rid of all of the tumors in my liver. But she told me she did not want me to get caught up in that idea, that the main purpose of treatment was just to prolong my life as long as possible, but that there wasn't a cure and that Cabo isn't a cure. I, at the time, admittedly was a little bitter about being told not to get caught up in the idea that the tumors in my liver could ever be gone. I thought it was possible. I now know why she said that. Due to the size of my tumors and how many I had, it was very, very unlikely that Cabo would have ever been able to get rid of those on its own. So I totally understand why she said that. At the time, it wasn't necessarily what I wanted to hear, of course. But it's not their job to tell me what I want to hear. It's their job to tell me what I need to hear. But she did make a really good call, I think, to start me on Cabo. Right as we started that, we had decided to move to Austin. And then I was on Cabo for 2.5 months. So about 3 weeks into my treatment on Cabo, I ended up switching oncologists. There had been a couple times that I didn't feel like I was in the best spot with my current oncologist. Like I said, I think very highly of her, and I think she's very brilliant. I just don't think that it was the right fit for my case. I didn't want to switch oncologists because I'm somebody that avoids conflict. I really respected her. And again, I felt like I was just causing a stir for nothing. I had all of those same feelings that I had when I wanted to get a second opinion at MD Anderson. I felt like, okay, am I going to hurt my case? Me even thinking about getting another oncologist. Is she going to be upset with me? I didn't want to make her upset. Just very, very stressful. I really didn't want to switch oncologists, but I just knew that that was going to be the right decision for me. And so I had been speaking with another patient who had been going to MD Anderson. She had a rare type of kidney cancer, and she spoke very, very highly of a specific oncologist. I had also seen him all over a bunch of videos about rare kidney cancers and had seen a lot of information about him kind of being the go-to person for rare kidney cancers at MD Anderson. And so I, at this point, knew I really wanted him as my oncologist. It was a big, messy process to try to switch up. Maybe I'll talk about that process in another video as well. Extremely stressful. I did ultimately end up switching oncologists. The straw that kind of broke the camel's back was after I had started Cabo, I started getting some gum bleeding, but it wasn't too bad yet. I went in for my second dose of my COVID vaccine, and then one night I had gotten a little bit of a red rash, and then my gum started bleeding a lot more. And so I had called the nurses line, and they told me to go to the ER just to get checked out just in case. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't having any bleeding issues, especially since I had a bleeding disorder. Again, this was from the Cabo, not from the vaccine, but they wanted me to get checked out just in case. So I went to the ER, and then I had messaged an oncologist at MD Anderson to let her know that I was in the ER. When I was in the ER, they had me stop taking Cabo until I could talk again with my oncologist to restart. And so at that time, I had already established an oncologist in Austin. Basically, the setup that they wanted is they wanted me to have a local oncologist if I was going to be living in Austin, because I was far enough from Houston that I needed somebody here to monitor for side effects, who knew my case if I ever ended up in the hospital. The straw that broke the camel's back was after I had been in the ER, I had messaged my oncologist at MD Anderson, and I couldn't get a response back. I let her know that I had been in the ER and I was waiting to figure out if I should restart Cabo. And I had also asked my Austin oncologist if I should restart Cabo as well, but that decision was supposed to be made by MD Anderson. And I didn't get a response back about a week. When I hadn't gotten a response, that was kind of the last straw for me, and I decided, okay, I probably should find another oncologist. And so I worked with Casey Cure, which is a kidney cancer organization. I knew the oncologist that I really wanted to switch to. So they reached out on my behalf to connect me with that oncologist, and he was willing to take on my case, which I am extremely grateful for. I had some communication issues with the previous oncologist, but all of the oncologists at MD Anderson are amazing. And my previous oncologist, like I said, I think she's brilliant and I respected her a lot. I just don't think she was the best fit for my case. I ended up switching, and I absolutely love the oncologist that I have. He is incredible, he's brilliant, he's very smart, and he's extremely responsive, which I appreciate so much. So during that time, I switched oncologists, and then my original oncologist wanted to wait 3 months to scan me after Cabo. I had asked them if I could scan at 6, and they told me no, there's no reason to. I switched oncologists. He wanted me scanned at 6 weeks. 6 weeks, we scanned me again, and we could see that I was responding to Cabo. Then with my new oncologist, my treatment plan also changed. So his main goal was to then get me to surgery instead of just keeping me on systemic treatment and just prolonging my life. He thought that if we could get these tumors to shrink enough to the point that we could do surgery, that a cure could be in the realm of possibilities. So our primary goal there switched to getting to surgery, but the surgeon at MD Anderson didn't feel comfortable yet with the number of liver lesions that I had and how big they were. He still didn't think I was in a spot that was operable. And so we were going to have to continue on Cabo until it shrunk enough, and then they wanted me to get the surgery done at MD Anderson. During the same time, so as I was switching oncologists for MD Anderson, I had also met Driven to Cure. And I'm going to make a separate video where I'm going to talk about Driven to Cure and how I got to surgery from that point going forward, because that's a whole story in itself. When I started on Cabo and when I was told that treatment was just to prolong my life as long as possible, I still never gave up. I knew how rare my case was, and I just wanted this massive tumor out of me. So I constantly was reading as many research papers as I could. I was learning as much about kidney cancer as I possibly could and reaching out to as many places as possible. And one day when I was browsing on another patient's page, I found a bright orange GTR and an organization that supports rare kidney cancers, which felt like a crazy coincidence for me. So I worked in motorsport for about 15 years in my entire career, and motorsports is a pretty niche industry. Rare kidney cancers are super niche. So the fact that these two worlds collided felt like a crazy coincidence, and I knew I had to reach out. When I initially was reaching out to them, I was reaching out just thinking like, maybe we can connect our networks. I'd love to go to one of their events and help fundraise for kidney cancer. I had originally reached out to them for that, but while I was on the phone with Bruce, who now runs Driven to Cure, he had asked me what type of kidney cancer I had. And when he found out how rare the type of kidney cancer I had was, he instantly put me in contact with the National Cancer Institute, or the National Institutes of Health. And they are finally who approved my surgery. We'll talk about that process in my next video. I cannot be more grateful for Driven to Cure and everything that they did for me. Between Driven to Cure and Casey Cure, I wouldn't be in the position that I am now with an amazing oncologist who have been able to have such an incredible surgery to remove that tumor. I am so incredibly grateful that I found them and that they were willing to help me. So incredibly grateful for the National Cancer Institute and everything that they did for me and the surgery. And that video in itself is going to be extremely long. Everything that happened just feels insane. Almost didn't go through with surgery for many reasons. We had to do a last minute blood drive to go through with my surgery. It was nuts, but I would not be where I am today if it wasn't for Driven to Cure. And I will share that story in the next video. That's it. Adios. See ya.